All right, good evening. I think we are live. Hopefully, you can hear me and the picture's coming through and the sound is all right. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited tonight. We are cracking on with part 5 of our reading of Bertrand Russell's book, which is Has Man a Future? And it's been a lot of fun. I was kind of I had a suspicion going into this one, and I sort of suggested it and knew it would be a good one to read because I was aware of Bertrand Russell's background as a much lauded philosopher and scientist with places named after him, and his books printed and sent out to all libraries all over the world. He was given lots of high-level influential positions in educational institutions and teaching roles and these kind of things. And I knew that he was much propped up by the establishment and celebrated in the same kind of way as H.G. Wells. And so I knew, I had a feeling, I had a bit of a suspicion going into this book that it was going to be some sort of pitch for New World Order. And lo and behold, in the last video, part 4, he came out and he said it. No, part 3, he said it in part 3, actually. Which I read through yesterday morning, and then I was so amazed and excited and happy with that I went straight on and did part 4 last night. And today we are doing part 5. We're going to conclude the book, the last 3 chapters. So without any further ado, hello, good evening. Good to be here. I think you all know me by now. I'm Nick. I'm the creator of Hayes Reviews. And we're cracking on with some book readings. So the way these videos usually work, if you're new here, we read through a chapter, and then we have a little discussion and a bit of a reflection on what we have read. Now, currently, this book we're working our way through is quite a slender volume with short chapters, so we've been getting 2 chapters into each video usually. But, don't let the size of the book fool you. These are grand ideas and big plans for world government and arguments in favor of world government. And as he said in part 4, that we control people and children by making them scared. He said if you've got a lot of unruly children and they're running around and they're being bad and they're misbehaving and jumping, climbing the walls, and the way you get them to behave is to make them all scared of something. And then they will sit down and they will follow you and follow your orders, and they'll be good little children. And he said this works the same for adults. The implication being that no one in their right mind who was secure and happy and feeling good about life would sign up or support a world government. And so there needs to be some fear. And my kind of working thesis is the fear aspect comes in with the nuclear weapons narrative. Now, we've been sold this story of nuclear weapons and the reality of them, I would say mainly, and correct me, this might be different for you, but to me, it's mainly come to me through films and television shows. There's a memorable scene in Terminator 2 where she has that dream, Sarah Connor, she has that dream, and a bomb gets dropped. Skynet launches a nuclear bomb on her city, and the mushroom cloud goes up, and the fireball heads towards her, and she gets eviscerated as she's clinging onto the fence, and she just gets turned into a skeleton. And a really visceral, powerful kind of image imprinted in your mind of the terror of these kind of weapons. And then another aspect of nuclear weapons is the fallout and the radiation that we're told occurs. And the way I learned about this was through a TV series called Chernobyl, which was a really well-made series, 4 parts, I think. All-star cast, incredible script, tense, nail-biting drama. But in that, which told the story of the nuclear reactor meltdown at Chernobyl, you get all these really gory, visceral scenes of people's whose flesh is melting off their bodies, basically, when they've been exposed to the nuclear reactor. The helicopter flies over and they're trying to dump water above it, but anyone who's leaning out the helicopter for too long gets a massive dose of radiation poisoning, and then they end up just kind of melting and turning into puddles. Very visceral, very gruesome, but it's film, it's narrative, it's story. And so the question is, what is the actual hard scientific proof and evidence out there for these weapons and the damage they do? And I know there are questions around, what the reality of these nuclear weapons is, and I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I'm just a person who asks questions, and what I'm kind of mentioning all this for is because this book Bertrand Russell has really been painting this nasty picture of gruesome, terrifying weapons, and he calls there was a phrase that stuck with me. I might have to dig it up. I think I put it out in the Telegram group from a previous video. He said, the silent oven of death. He said that the outdoors, if we use these weapons, the outdoors will become a silent oven of death. Which that is incredible, scary kind of poetic language there to describe something, right? And often it's hearts and minds, and these people, these propagandists, these architects of the narrative, these would be sort of influencers. Bertrand Russell, he was like an old school influencer. He was an influencer back in the day. I compared him to Yuval Noah Harari, and I think he was sort of the Yuval Noah Harari of his time. Approximately 100 years ago, he was doing his thing. This book's 1961, but he was writing books for decades and decades before that. And we learned that he figured out at 15 years old there was no free will. And the rest is history. Oh, no, actually. And then he got very suicidal, and then he was saved because he fell in love with algebra. and so he was kind of pushing this narrative of there's no free will. It's very in line with Yuval Noah Harari's we are just hackable animals, and the era of free will is over, and we're going to automate everything, and we're going to have a massive class of useless eaters, and those useless eaters, the useless class, we're going to give them drugs and computer games, something like that. And so I think Bertrand Russell was kind of in line with pushing this kind of narrative back in the day, and there's going to be some sort of direct lineage that we could probably trace there. So I'm kind of viewing him like that as a sort of propagandist, and he's drumming up all this fear. Why is he drumming up all this fear about these horrific weapons that are going to turn nature into a silent oven of death? Well, it's because he's trying to further the agenda of one world government and the New World Order, in other words, which H.G. Wells wrote about in his book, The Open Conspiracy, which I read on this channel, and you can find that in the playlist. So I kind of, I knew Bertrand Russell, I had a suspicion he was going to be pushing the same sort of message, and it turns out I was right. And it was quite funny to get to that part in the book. So it's been a wild ride so far. I think we've really found some nuggets, good quotes in these chapters, and we've had a good time reading it, and I've had a good laugh. Some parts of this have made me chuckle. So let's have a quick look at the chat and see who's here tonight. Oh, we got all our regulars. Frank, Peter, Richard. Hello, hello, hello. Heidi, Elizabeth, Gwen. So glad you are back. Thank you for being here. LJ, Hasdak. Wonderful. Thank you all. It's so awesome. You guys, I think, have been here most of you have been here for most of these videos, which is really cool. We've got a groovy little study group going. People who like to learn. People who recognize that the best place to learn is books. Maybe you got your own book collections out there. Maybe you're a bibliophile like me. I'm hoping that my energy and my enthusiasm is kind of resonating with you, and that's why you keep coming back. But certainly, I appreciate you being here, and it's very nice to have you here. So let's get into today's reading. It might be a slightly longer stream tonight because we've got 3 chapters to get through, and I've been waffling on already for 10 minutes. But before we get into the book, a couple of things to go through to kind of set the scene, a little bit of grammar to feed into the context of this book. But the very first thing, and this is really in line with Hasdak, your comment, fear equals control. This was a book that was recommended to me, and I get a lot of book recommendations, and people look at my Instagram and they kind of say, hey, what about this one? Do you know this one? And this one came through to me, and this is called The State of Emergency, Keeping the Global Population in Check. And this is from Clarity Press, and I don't think I've read books of theirs before, but this sounds like a very fascinating book to have a look at. And it says, using fear to grease the wheels of global transformation. Yes, this is so true. It's about getting people so scared and so insecure and so worried that they're confused and they're not, and they just want someone else to come in and save the day and fix things for them, whether that is a politician, or some sort of superhero kind of, nerd Jesus like Elon Musk, or some kind of influencer. It's all about kind of getting you so insecure that you look for an external outward hero figure and you latch onto them and you vote for them. And That's never going to work. The only way through all of this is to take on personal responsibility, to focus on improving yourself and ironing out the kinks in your own personality and psyche and soul, and kind of become the best version of yourself that you possibly can. And not that we're all going to achieve that and make super magnificent gains and strides, but it's just about a little bit chipping away every single day, trying to be a little bit better than you were yesterday, and realizing that that is really the key. That is the key weapon that we have in this war, is to just sort of, like the turtle, gradually improve and focus and just get better a little bit each day, and do a little bit better, and treat each other a bit better, and treat yourself better as well. Be kinder to yourself and hold yourself accountable, whether you need a bit of discipline to kick a bad habit or to start a good habit. All these little actions add up and add up and add up. And the people who are on that path of gradually making these changes in order to improve themselves, that is what kind of empowers and gets us through these kind of insane agendas. But this book does look very interesting to me, because I think it would be, and it's here we go. We got COVID-19, used COVID-19 to seize power by declaring a state of global emergency. Yeah. So exactly, it's how the shock doctrine is done, and how these events are spun up and then emphasized and projected and broadcast through our media and through our radio. It's why it's so interesting to look at people like H.G. Wells, who wrote The War of the Worlds, which was broadcast out over the radio and ended up making loads of people panic and stress and pack their bags and get in their cars and drive away because they thought they were being invaded by Martians. And then also Bertrand Russell here, kind of scaring his audience and scaring the Parliament, the British Parliament as well, with this narrative about this radioactive fallout that was going to wipe all life off the face of the earth. And then you've got that happening in tandem with school children being told to, when in America, some sort of drills run, where you had to get down and hide under the desk, and they would practice, in the case of a nuclear strike during the Cold War, you would have to drop down and get under the desk and, assume that position and kiss your ass goodbye type of thing. All done to freak people out and scare them and get them believing in something that would grease the wheels for them to hand over sovereignty and responsibility and freedom, which is the goal, So that looks like a pretty interesting book, one that I will add to my collection at some point. Maybe we'll get around to doing a review on this channel, but I wanted to share that recommendation as it came to me with you guys too. So let's have a look at some of the tabs we got here. So this was a clip that was sent over to me in the Telegram group. Thank you, Frank, for this one. This is Democrat Dick Durbin, and he has a bill to turn illegal migrants into soldiers in the U.S. Army. I was pretty incredulous to hear that. Like, you can't have migrants working in the U.S. Army, can you? So there's a clip to have a look at. It's just 1 minute, 16 seconds. You can check that out. I'll put the link below this video, see what you think. But this kind of sent me on a very, very quick cursory look into this topic of illegal migrants becoming soldiers. But that's not the only issue. Frank also put my attention onto this one, which is a senior Garda intelligence and security role set to be filled by a Canadian officer. So you've got Canadians running the Garda over in Ireland. You've got illegal migrants joining soldiers in the U.S. Army. And so I did a little search about what about voting. So I'd searched for non-citizens vote in America. And this is the Brave browser gave me a little summary here, which is pretty handy, actually. It gives you the links, and it produces this little AI-produced summary, which is a good starting point. It says, as of December 2022, at least 13 local jurisdictions in the U.S. allow non-citizen voting. So non-citizens can come in and vote for different elections and different roles to be filled, which is very fascinating. There is a federal law prohibition on non-citizens voting for federal elections, including presidential elections. Okay. However, federal law specifies that non-citizens are allowed to vote for other offices if they're allowed to under the state constitution. So maybe that might be mayor, or I don't know exactly what you vote for in America, but it could be local mayor, perhaps, that a non-citizen could have a say in that. And then, very interestingly, right here at the bottom, it says the right to vote should be extended to every adult resident of the United States, including permanent legal immigrants, temporary legal immigrants, and undocumented people. So, so, so that's just everybody, I think, isn't it? If you're undocumented, and this term undocumented people, that means illegal immigrants, doesn't it? But they're spinning it there, and I think that's foreignpolicy.com. That last quote gives us that little 3, and it shows us it's from foreignpolicy.com. So they're not illegal immigrants. There's nothing illegal about them. They're just undocumented people. So it's a little bit of newspeak for you, a little bit of, and that's what we've been seeing in this book. Bertrand Russell, he's been framing the capitalist versus communism issue as communist versus anti-communist. So you can see how they play with language and they change it and they soften it in certain ways. One memorable example was with the Israel-Palestine invasion? I don't know what word won't get me banned, but they were saying that when Israelis were dying, they were being killed. So many, like 15 Israelis were killed, and then they would say, 10 Gazans have died, and there's a very big difference. It's subtle, but it's big between killed and have died, and it's that kind of language that you've got to become very good at recognizing and seeing when it's done. And I thought that was a good example to highlight. They're just undocumented people. Just give them some documents and that'll be it. So interesting developments. So I went over to Quora and I wanted to ask, how is it possible that illegal immigrants can work as police officers in California? Well, somebody else asked this, but I wanted to know the answer, so I clicked on it to have a look. And it says they're not illegal immigrants is one answer, and there's some gloating down here about how gullible conservatives are. Here we are. I think, goddamn, conservatives sure are gullible. So they're kind of laughing and saying, well, no, it's not illegal immigrants. Because all it is it's people who are legally authorized to work in the United States can become police officers. But it does say here that among the categories of work authorized non-citizens that would likely be eligible are permanent workers, asylees and refugees, and individuals who are protected under the program of deferred action for childhood arrivals. So to me, that looks like a loophole, asylees and refugees. You show up and you say, I'm seeking asylum and I'm a refugee. And then they say, okay, well, do you want to work in our police force? What could possibly go wrong with that, right? What could possibly go wrong? And then I wanted to thank Frank again. He said today's UK column was touching upon similar issues. And he showed me some headlines on some slides that they used in this episode. I'm always happy to promote and support UK Column. I think they do wonderful work. Their presentation is kind of very dry and slow. I think it's not going to grab and hold the attention like some very charismatic speakers, maybe a Russell Brand type person or someone with a bit more pizzazz. But the information they bring is solid and the research they do is solid. And so these are links under today's episode. And so I had a little scan through these, and we could see war fever against Russia reaches Australia. Lots of headlines here about conscription, mandating national service. Norway is not prepared to mount any kind of defense against an aggressive Russia. That's been the hot topic recently. Foreign Affairs has put this article out, The Next Global War. But down here, we've got Daily Mail here in the UK, Army fitness tests to be rewritten to make sure female soldiers can qualify. So my understanding of that is that they're going to make it a bit looser and easier and less rigorous, I think. Because they need more people to qualify, so they're gonna make it easier to get in. That's what it sounds like, which is reassuring. Daily Mail, apparently Charles said, "I'm going to recruit an army of 2 million to save our lost generation." Yeah, Charles, right? The lost generation. You know what they need? They need to be murdered. Then they need to go murder some people, and they need to get murdered, and that will help them not be lost anymore. Telegraph is pumping out some more fear porn, saying why it may already be too late for the West to avoid war. And there's a few more down here that I highlighted. on this sort of voting and non-citizens. Apparently, New York has moved to allow 800,000 non-citizens to vote in local elections, and the Eagle Online says non-citizens will be able to vote in DC. And then we've got the no money, useless for war situation. The Guardian is saying 90% of schools in England will run out of money. And the Guardian is also saying at least 26 English councils at risk of bankruptcy, while at the same time, the UK is giving 12 billion to support the war in Ukraine. So a snapshot really here of headlines and a bit of a whistle-stop tour through all these things. Oh, and sorry, these two at the bottom. EU votes resolution to list hate speech as a crime. And the EU's hate speech bill is not simply about being tough on prejudice, but it is a crackdown on dissent and a restriction on democracy. Now, if you remember, Bertrand Russell says in this book that the one world government, the world government which is established, must have a monopoly on force, must be the only powers allowed to have these weapons, and they're going to have to basically silence anybody who criticizes them and make any kind of insurrection or uprising impossible through a monopoly on force. That's what he says. And so all these headlines that we just had a whistle-stop tour through kind of tell us and fall into place as problems, as problems that have been manufactured and cooked up and allowed to happen, which the reaction will be a lot of chaos and a lot of desperation and starvation and hunger and conflict. And then the solution to that chaos is going to be, hey, do you know what we need? We need a WHO pandemic treaty. We need a one world government. We need to empower the UN peacekeeping troops to go in wherever there's a conflict. We need to consolidate all the force in the world into the hands of this one organization, and they're going to be the arbiter of peace, and they're going to rule everything top down. So you can kind of see all these crises unfolding and being cooked up and being manipulated, and I think Bertrand Russell is kind of foreshadowing all that in this book. That's kind of my thesis and where I'm at the minute. What do you think in the chat? We'll just have a little quick look over there. As Hasdak says, the powers at B had their nudge unit and Brigade 77. Yeah, the nudge unit. I've got a book on that, Inside the Nudge Unit. They wrote a whole book just saying, yeah, this is it. This is what we do. We're nudging you. We're using psychology against you to get you to do what we want. And that book was written before lockdowns began. Definitely one to look at. Peter Estrada says, service for citizenship is not new. Same blueprint, different generations. We are more Roman than Rome. Only the names have changed. Yes, definitely. In fact, and Bertrand Russell did talk about Rome, and he talked about the collapse of Rome, and he was saying, Rome was there, and everyone thought it was going to last forever, and then it collapsed into this group of warring nations, basically. And so what we should do is build another bigger, more huge Rome. That's literally what he said. LJ Bates says, just shows you the power of words and written language. Great background introduction. Thumbs up. Thumbs up to you. Yeah, the words and the language is so important. I've mentioned on my What Are We Doing Here video that I was an English teacher. I did an English literature at university. Always loved books, always loved reading. But I was more into literature until my sort of let's say, tumble down the rabbit hole as precipitated by the lockdowns in 2020. And that is when I started gathering all these books over here, more based on history and hidden history and the kind of counter narrative, which is often backed up with better evidence and more truth and more solid information than the mainstream gives us. So yes, definitely. Words and written language, incredibly important tools to know how to use. But weapons as well, and so you got to know how to wield them and defend yourself against them. It's no accident that the word sword has word in it. Think about that. The pen is mightier than the sword, but the word is mightier than both, I would say. Hasdak says he's been watching UK Con for years. Great, yes. They were new to me in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, so I'm really glad they're out there doing their thing. I think they are fantastic. Okie dokie. Yes, okay. Let's get to the reading then. So thank you. We got a few thumbs up. We got 14 people watching. Lovely, and we got some activity in the chat. What more could a man want? Well, I'll tell you, regardless of what you want, this is what you're going to get. Some more Bertie, some more B. Russell. Okay, let's have a look then. So this is going to be chapter 9, and this is, zoom in a bit, chapter 9, disarmament. General disarmament, though immensely important and desirable, would not, if achieved, be enough in itself to secure a stable peace. So long as scientific technique continues to be understood, any major war that might break out would lead to the manufacture of nuclear weapons by both sides and of whatever even more deadly weapons had been foreseen during the previous years of peace. But although disarmament, for this reason, is not alone sufficient, it is a very essential step without which no other can lead to much of value. Those who favor nuclear disarmament often base their case upon the contention that weapons of mass destruction are immoral. Undoubtedly, this is true. But so are bows and arrows immoral. That is such a false equivalency, isn't it? There is, it is true, a profound and important difference in degree. If it is wicked to kill one man, it is 200 million times as wicked to kill 200 million people. But it is not immorality which is the really novel feature of modern weapons. And just as a side note, remember in at the beginning of, I forget what chapter it was. I think it was part 3, maybe chapter 6 or 7. At the beginning of that, he was like, just throw out the morals and get rid of them for 1 second and hear me out. Right before he told us he wants some world government. And now he's going on about morality, but let's see what he says. The really novel feature is the absolute certainty that, in a war, both sides will be defeated. It is this that makes all thought of modern war silly as well as wicked. The people, whether in East or West, who tolerate policies leading towards war are victims of delusion. Some, who advocate brinkmanship, persuade themselves that in a war of nerves, the other side is sure to yield first. This is what Hitler thought after Munich, and his miscalculation led to his downfall. In the same situation at the present day, it would have led also to the downfall of his enemies. There is another group of even more dangerous warmongers. These are the people so filled with national or ideological pride that, in the face of all evidence, they still believe that their side would win. I think that this unfounded belief is widely prevalent in both Russia and America and is encouraged by the governments of both countries as an asset in negotiation. There is a third group, the group of sacrificial fanatics. This group holds that it is noble to fight and die in a good cause, even if the result of your sacrifice is going to be a much worse world than that which would exist if you were less prepared for martyrdom. Unfortunately, ever since Hiroshima, these three groups have acted together and have succeeded hitherto in preventing anything that might diminish the risk of nuclear war. There have been moments, it is true, when one side or the other showed some glimmerings of common sense, but never have both sides felt these glimmerings at the same moment. The history of disarmament conferences from Hiroshima to the present day is one of the most discouraging stories in human history. After the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was felt, even in America, when they had the monopoly, that atomic energy should be internationalized. The American government employed Lilienthal to draw up a proposal in this sense for the consideration of the American government. It was an admirable proposal, but it was felt that it could not be offered to other powers exactly as it stood. What emerged as an international offer was the Baruch proposal, in which there were certain additions which it was hoped would make the proposal unacceptable to Russia, and this hope proved justified. It must be said that, in the years immediately following the end of the Second World War, Stalin did everything in his power to make conciliation impossible. America, in the year or so after the end of the war, carried out an enormous reduction of conventional arms without eliciting any response from Stalin. Stalin, on the contrary, although at Yalta he had undertaken that countries other than Russia in the Eastern Sphere should have democratic governments, established a rigid military and police dictatorship in all the satellite countries. When this was followed by the Berlin blockade and the Russian acquisition of nuclear weapons, the West settled down to the Cold War with a hardening of anti-Russian feeling and policy. When, after the death of Stalin, the USSR made tentative approaches to a lessening of tension, the West received these approaches skeptically. In spite of disarmament conferences and conferences for the abolition of tests, nothing whatever has been done, except for a time a moratorium on tests so long as the conference on tests should continue. Although in early years after 1945, the chief blame must fall on Russia, this cannot be said until lately of the years after Stalin's death. On the contrary, when Khrushchev proposed universal and complete disarmament, the West cynically dismissed his suggestion as a trick. What Western authorities thought, although this was not exactly what they said in public, was Khrushchev seems to pretend that the purpose of a disarmament conference is to secure disarmament. He must know perfectly well that this is not the purpose on either side, and that the true purpose is merely to play a propaganda game in which each side can pretend to want disarmament without incurring any danger of getting it. His proposal of universal disarmament as it stands is obviously defective as regards inspection. We make this a reason for rejecting the proposal without first inquiring whether Khrushchev would agree to amendments obviating this objection. And so, once more, nothing is done. It is recognized on both sides that there would be immense advantages in making what is called the first strike. If either side makes an unexpected nuclear attack, it can do so much damage that a really effective second strike would become very difficult. This is one of the problems with which Kahn's thermonuclear war is mainly concerned. Many influential Americans, as well as many influential people in Western Europe, believe that such an unprovoked attack by the USSR may occur at any moment. It is to be supposed that the corresponding opinion exists in Russia, and that alertness against an expected first strike is just as great there as it is in the West. This mutual alertness not only militates against any possible détente, but also immensely increases the likelihood of an unintended nuclear war. Seymour Melman, the editor of a very valuable book, Inspection for Disarmament, recognizes this danger and states it with great clarity and emphasis. He says on page 10, "Undoubtedly, the designers of nuclear weapons have attempted to build into them certain mechanical safeguards against accidental firing, such as the requirement for a deliberate adjustment before such weapons become operative. There are no final safeguards, however, against the probability of human failure. As nuclear weapons are produced by the tens of thousands and must be used by even more than that many men, the possibilities of world disaster through human failure cannot be ignored. One aberrant, psychotic person, or person gone momentarily out of control, could explode nuclear weapons at a random place or over any populated area. A space satellite could be mistaken for a ballistic missile. Since military tactics and technologies have become geared to the idea of rapid retaliation, such accidents would require only one misjudgment in response to set the swift moves and countermoves of catastrophic nuclear war in motion. As nuclear weapons are increasingly available and dispersed in more hands, the probabilities of such an accident must necessarily increase. In the judgment of this writer, such possibilities weaken the assumptions of rationally calculated moves among military powers, which underlie the strategies of peace through mutual armed deterrence. Lastly, one of the major assumptions of the mutual deterrence strategy will be drastically altered when many countries possess nuclear weapons. If a warhead should be set off in some city, it might be impossible to identify the aggressor. Because of the number of countries possessing bombs and the variety of possible ways for delivering nuclear explosives, unless the aggressor were known, it would be clearly impossible even to threaten retaliation. Thereby, the strategy of a balance of terror fails as a way for deterring nuclear attacks. This opinion is shared by all who have no political motive for disputing it, and even by some who have. For example, Lord Hailsham, our Minister of Science, says that sooner or later there will be war. C.P. Snow is even more emphatic. He says, quote, "Within at the most 10 years, some of those bombs are going off. That is a certainty," end quote. In an article on the moral unneutrality of science in the Monthly Review, that's where he said the quote. In an article on the moral of unneutrality of science in the Monthly Review. I could give many quotations expressing the same opinion, none of them from extremists. What does this mean in human terms? The likelihood of an unprovoked first strike by either Russia or America, probably under the impression that it is a retaliatory strike, is not very great on any one given day. But with each day that passes, the same likelihood, whatever it may be, is added and, in the end, becomes almost a certainty unless policies are changed. If CP Snow is right, and there is no reason whatever to think him wrong, at some day during the next 10 years, H-bombs will be hurled against Russia and in return against the West, or against the West and in return against Russia. We, in Britain, may have 4 minutes' notice that this is going to happen. It is hoped that, in America, there may be 25 minutes' notice. And what shall we be having notice of? We shall be having notice that a very large proportion of our population will be killed outright, and the remainder will die a slow and agonizing death. It is not expected by experts that anybody in Britain will survive. So long as the present policy of instant retaliation persists, there is a very grave danger that something which is not a Russian nuclear attack will be mistaken for such an attack. In this case, what our side believes to be retaliation will appear to the other side to be an unprovoked attack, and full-scale nuclear war will begin. This has very nearly happened several times already. There is a powerful radar station at Thule in the north of Greenland, which is intended to give warning of the approach of Soviet bombers. Pilots of planes containing H-bombs have been so thoroughly trained that they can be in the air within 2 minutes of receiving warning. Several times warning has been given when it turned out that what radar was showing was a flight of geese. Once, at least, the moon was mistaken for a Russian attack, and only the accidental interposition of an iceberg which broke communications prevented a retaliatory attack. So that's the second time he's mentioned this incident of the moon being mistaken for a Russian attack, which, I mean, that just is crazy to me. That doesn't make any sense at all. How can you mistake the moon? Does the moon show up on a radar? It's just bonkers. Like, I don't understand how that happens. That might be worth deep diving into and figuring it out. But he said it twice, so that claim is there. But my sense of all this so far and this reading is just absolute insecurity. Like, it could all be gone. We could all be dead in a moment's notice, and it's certain that it will happen. You are going to die very soon, but you'll never know when. And when you do know, you'll have 4 minutes to live, or 25 if you're in America. Fear, 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 isn't it? Just nonstop. Nonstop fear. Kind of like the great scam of 2020. That was a lot of fear, wasn't it? Lots of numbers and graphs and nightly reports and fear, and you can kill anyone just by walking on the same side of the road as them, and it would be better to dodge out into the traffic, even though, like, Anthony Fauci has now come out and said himself that, oh yeah, we just made up the social distancing thing. There was no science behind that. Fear, 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 fear. People who want you to live in fear don't have your best interests at heart. If they're trying to scare you, if they're trying to make you feel bad, they have an insidious motive, let's just say that. Oh, I completely lost my place. Flight of geese. Oh yeah, and an iceberg. Okay, let's just reread that. Once at least, the moon was mistaken for a Russian attack, and only the accidental interposition of an iceberg, which broke communications, prevented a retaliatory attack. So America and Russia have nukes pointed at each other. Some idiot in Greenland mistakes the moon for a Russian bomb, and an iceberg saves the day by interrupting a communication. What? Okay. On all these occasions, the bombers started on the journey of destruction. Our Prime Minister has assured us that there will be no war by accident. And the footnote says that was said in the House of Commons in November the 29th, 1960. One must suppose that he has never heard of these incidents. A more realistic view is expressed in a report on disarmament by the United Nations Association in March 1961, which concludes, quote, "We doubt whether there can be, in the long run, a world at all without disarmament. A spectre haunts us. A flock of wild geese flies silently across the white Arctic, and into a Soviet or a United States radar warning screen. The screen represents the geese as missiles. The United States government, or the Soviet Union, as the case may be, immediately mount a retaliatory nuclear strike. The typhoon of nuclear war begins. The geese fly solemnly onwards, sole survivors of the last World War. This improbable picture is not quite impossible. It symbolizes at least the present extraordinary phony peace in all its unreason and inhumanity. And this, sorry, I got to pause on this bit. This phony peace thing, right? This phony peace. These maniacs, these governments, and these warmongers, and these criminals, members of the criminocracy and the parasite class, they always want you to believe in that it's phony peace, that it's human nature to go out and fight and steal and terrorize and murder and rape and pillage and all this kind of thing, right? I don't think it is. I think most of the time, unless you live in a war zone, an actual war zone, which most of us do not, most of the time, most settlements of people, towns, villages, cities, people are just getting on about their day, going about their business, trying to, make ends meet and live their life and do what they got to do. It's pretty peaceful out there most of the time in most places. And I think that would be the case were it not for criminals, criminocracy, these organized warmongers who shimmy and shuffle their way into positions of influence and power and drum up fear in the rest of us. I don't think there is a phony peace like he just said here. I think peace is like the natural state of people. And when conflicts do arise, you can settle it without killing anybody, usually, a few punches and kicks and, okay, do you see, like you can settle it. You might have to, violence might be necessary. You might have to come to blows, but in a kind of, when people's basic needs are met, when there's food and when there's shelter and privacy, and you've got the people around you that you need to have around you, the people you love in your family, then we are a peaceful species by and large, as far as I can tell. That's what I think. So I don't think peace is phony. I think peace is the natural state, the natural way of things. But they THEY, the hierarchy enslaving you, they want you to think it's phony and fragile and it could be over in a moment's notice. And that's why you need to pay the government to protect you. Something like that anyway. 1 second. Okay. The final irrationality of nuclear war demands a symbol. Let it be the geese which shall stand for it. A warning as clear as the cry of those other geese so long ago to the Romans on the Capitol." End quote. In addition to the chance of human error, there is always the chance of a mechanical fault. The mechanisms involved are very complex, and no one can be sure that after bombers will have been started in error, the message recalling them will be duly received. If it is not, the human race perishes. Can anything justify the running of such a risk? So this paragraph is making me think of, well, if science is so good and scientism is so wonderful, why are you telling us that there's always chance for error that could lead to the death of everybody? It's a bit of a contradiction, isn't it? Trying to push the scientific worldview, and he's written the scientific outlook and the impact of science on society and how we need this top-down scientific man is what he refers to the species as, and how we need to ensure the future of scientific man. And yet here he's kind of like, yeah, but there's human error, there's mechanical faults, there's all sorts of things that could go wrong. So it's like even he doesn't believe in his kind of scientism. Maybe, and I don't think he did. I don't think he could do. I don't think anyone could really deep down, on a kind of soul level. I think you got to know that scientism is just a very small slice of the pie of reality. Nevertheless, the negotiators of the West and also of the East pursue their leisurely way, considering, so we must suppose, that the extermination of their population would be a smaller misfortune than some slight concession to the enemy. This is the politics of Bedlam. If the negotiators on either side were sane men or less immersed than they are in detail, they would realize that a nuclear war entailing these awful consequences is far the greatest risk that is being incurred, and that a reasonable give and take leading to agreement is the only policy compatible with sanity or humane feeling, or with reluctance to condemn ourselves or our children, our friends, and our nation to a totally futile death. Meanwhile, pride, love of power, and belief in the possibilities of unending bluff blind the statesmen of East and West to their obvious duty to humanity and allow them to pursue their murderous game unchecked. And so here he's kind of appealing to our sense of nation. But earlier in the book, he was saying, we got to get rid of this nationalism stuff. Same thing that H.G. Wells said, nationalism, that's out, get rid of it. We got to train people up as world citizens, global citizens, and we can have these armies of mixed nationalities to enforce this world citizenship and this world government. And then, that is why all the news articles and headlines we had a look at the start of this episode start to come into focus, and you can kind of see the relevance of them because they align up with what he's saying in this book. What is this now? 60 years ago, he was saying he was saying armies of mixed nationalities is what we need to bring in a world government. And now you're seeing in your countries the vote being given to asylum seekers and refugees and undocumented people. All right. But it just seems funny that he's appealing to nation here, when at the same time elsewhere in the book he's telling us we need to get rid of those nasty right-wing nationalist far-right Christians. Okay, carrying on. The spread of nuclear weapons to powers which have not hitherto had them is universally admitted to increase very greatly the danger of a nuclear war. At first, America was the only nuclear power, then America and Russia, then America and Russia and Britain. The acquisition of nuclear weapons by France has probably occurred. There is reason to think that Israel will possess them before long, and if so, the United Arab Republic is sure to follow suit. It cannot be long before communist China insists upon becoming a nuclear power. Any two nuclear powers may quarrel, and, if they do, the system of alliances will make a world war certain. The number of pairs of nuclear powers that may quarrel increases much faster than the number of nuclear powers. While only two powers possessed nuclear weapons, there was only one such pair. While there are three nuclear powers, there are three such pairs. With four powers, the number rises to 6, with 5 to 10, with 6 to 15, and so on. It is not only for this reason that the spread of H-bombs to new powers is dangerous, it is also because there is an increase in the risk that some government may be reckless or fanatical or mad. Aren't all governments reckless, fanatical, and mad? It is not so long since a great power was controlled by a madman, and there is no reason to think that a repetition of such an event is impossible or even improbable. Now, I'm going to assume here that it is not so long since a great power was controlled by a madman, that he's referring to the 1940s tiny mustache Charlie Chaplin fan. But he frames this kind of dialectic of communism and anti-communism like he's not referring to the power wielded by the communists and used to kill like crazy amounts of people, starve them out, put them in gulags. I don't think he's referring to those madmen and that great power that they had and used to bring about such crazy catastrophic levels of death. That always gets overlooked, like just how like in today's world, you can if you saw a swastika to your backpack or your hat or your jacket or something, you go out in public, people are going to be like, dude, no, you can't do that. There might be a hate crime. You might get arrested. I remember the anti-lockdown protests being what's the word? Kind of slandered and written off by someone I knew on Fedbook back when I used it. And he was saying, look, all these people protesting the lockdowns, they're all right-wing Nazis. And his evidence was like a picture of somebody who was displaying a Nazi flag off their balcony on the street where the march was going. And that was his evidence. So it's pretty taboo to bring out the swastika in public, probably rightly so. But you can walk around with a hammer and sickle, on your backpack, and you can say I'm communist and I'm proud. And they teach, they kind of teach it like it was some, there's in Manchester. I was in Manchester a while back, and I saw a poster, and it was like, some summer event, some festival for communists. And I'm like, the number of people who died under communism. Do you know what? Incredible. Oh, but they just didn't do it right. We'll get it right next time. We'll do it properly next time. So I don't know what you think about that quote, but to me, I think that's what he's hinting at. But that is part of the establishment narrative. It's like there's only one instance of horrific wholesale murder and death, and it was the Charlie Chaplin fan from Germany back in the 1940s. And communism's great. Yeah, that never caused any problems or murder or death anywhere. So even that whole thing that I just summarized and laid out there, probably very inexpertly, even that was that narrative was being pushed back then 60 years ago. That is pretty mind-blowing, actually. Although he didn't say it explicitly. That was my interpretation of what he said, so I should make that clear. To quote Seymour Melman once more, the analysis of technical feasibility of inspection for disarmament takes on special importance in view of the present or imminent availability of nuclear weapons to many nations. The means for the extermination of the human species thus pass into the hands of many governments, large and small. End quote. The suspension of tests is important on two quite different grounds. On the one hand, fallout distributes radioactive poisons throughout the world. Some of these cause leukemia and cancer, while others affect the genital tract and lead to the birth of idiots and monsters. But there is another reason for the prohibitions of tests, which is that without them, a power which has not yet possessed nuclear weapons cannot effectively manufacture them. After years of detailed negotiation, it had seemed that an agreement prohibiting tests was imminent, but at this point Khrushchev introduced his Troika proposal, according to which the necessary inspections were to be carried out by three men, one Eastern, one Western, and one neutral. According to his suggestion, they were only to act when they were unanimous. It is not clear that he was prepared to insist upon unanimity, but his suggestion so angered the West that an agreement prohibiting tests became improbable. For the present, hope of an end to tests was almost extinguished by the Soviet decision to resume tests, with the inevitable American reaction. The almost certain outcome is that in this, as in all other matters concerning disarmament, nothing whatever will be done in the near future in spite of the fact, which is universally recognized, that by doing nothing the powers continually increase the risk of nuclear catastrophe. Let us now pass from the dreary record of inaction to consideration of what should be done if the human race is to have a chance of continued existence. The first step should be the stopping of tests. Of this I have already spoken sufficiently. The next step should be the prevention of the spread of nuclear weapons to new countries. This could easily be achieved if the existing nuclear powers were agreed upon it. There is no reason to think that it would have any effect upon the balance of power. The West would regret the acquisition of H-bombs by Communist China, and the East would regret their acquisition by France and Western Germany. But there is no way of securing that they shall spread only to one side, and no reason therefore to think that either side would lose by preventing their spread everywhere. The next step, which would be much more difficult, would be a general agreement to cease the manufacture of nuclear weapons. This, of course, would require a very thorough system of inspection. But there is reason to believe that such a system could be effective and trustworthy. This is the conclusion arrived at in the book on inspection for disarmament already quoted above. I think, although this is not suggested in Melman's book, that it would be a good thing if there were neutrals among the inspectors, and if, in case of disagreement, the neutral inspectors were to make the report of their findings public. In regard to inspection, there is a difficulty as to existing stocks. It would be very easy to conceal these, and hardly possible for an inspectorate to discover the concealment. There are, however, ways of circumventing this difficulty. An H-bomb is useless unless there are means of delivering it on enemy territory, and the necessary launching sites, so long as they are fixed, are easily detected. This would not apply to movable sites such as are afforded by Polaris submarines. But a submarine cannot easily be built in secret, and it should not be difficult to discover what submarines capable of carrying H-bombs have been built. There is one possible reform which would be immensely useful if the nations could be persuaded to adopt it. That is the prohibition of foreign troops on any territory. I am afraid, however, that this is not likely to be achieved except by a system of general disarmament. American troops in Britain and Western Europe are considered essential by NATO, although not, apparently, by the best American authorities. See Khan on thermonuclear war. And Russian troops in such countries as Hungary and Eastern Germany are obviously necessary if Russia is to keep the population of those countries in subjection. Nevertheless, as one of the more distant aims in the pursuit of peace, this measure is to be borne in mind as one to be achieved if and when it becomes practicable. Khrushchev's proposal for complete and general disarmament should be taken far more seriously than it has been taken in the West. The West, as often before with Russian proposals, has maintained that the Soviet government will not agree to adequate inspection. Khrushchev said, at first, that he would tolerate any degree of inspection after disarmament, but not before. He must have known that the West would not agree to this. If the West were to disarm and were to discover too late that the East had not disarmed, the discoveries revealed by inspection would no longer serve any useful purpose. I've just had an idea about all this back and forth and pretending to make agreements on disarmaments and inspections and da-da-da-da. And this is a theory, right? But what about, look, we all know behind the scenes that these nuclear bombs aren't real, right? And obviously, we're not going to start launching them at each other and turn everything into a silent oven of death. Nobody needs that. Nobody wants that. But now, hear me out. If we just agree to go back and forth like we're going to, bomb each other, we can take way more tax money and funnel it into these organizations and these bomb building groups and scientists, and we can justify more taxation. We can justify less spending on things that benefit our citizens, and we can more money for us. We got to keep the money coming in because you don't want to get bombed by those bad people over there, do you? And so maybe it wasn't in their interest to ever reach an agreement, and maybe that's why they didn't. Not because they're kind of just can't figure it out. People are smart. They can negotiate. Win-win situations can be worked out all the time, particularly if what's on the balance is, the existence of all life on Earth. So maybe they did work out an agreement and a deal, but they didn't disclose it to the public because that military industrial budget, that's a big budget. That's a lot of jobs also. That keeps the economy ticking over and turning. It really keeps things moving. It requires a lot of production, a lot of trade. Maybe there were economic reasons to just keep. I don't know. I'm not an expert, and this is a theory. But how does that sound, and what do you think? And maybe Bertrand wasn't aware of it, but he was being played himself when he was writing this kind of stuff and putting it out. Just a possibility and just a thought. If you've got any, what do you think about that? Put it in the chat. I'll have a look at the end of this chapter. Now I really have lost my place then. Let's see. He must have known the West would not agree to this. If the West were to disarm and were to discover too late that the East had not disarmed, the discoveries revealed by inspection would no longer serve any useful purpose. But Khrushchev has also said that if universal and complete disarmament is decided upon, he will tolerate... Oh yeah, we did that bit. Was it here? It has been content to reject his proposal as something not intended seriously. This was a grievous error which would not have been committed if the West had genuinely desired disarmament. That was it, wasn't it? Yeah, so maybe there was never any kind of genuine desire of disarmament. Maybe there was a genuine desire of, let's keep up this illusion of armament because, a lot of jobs, a lot of money, a lot of control, a lot of top-down control for these little slice of parasite people at the top looking down at the seething masses of humanity underneath going, there's like millions of them for every one of us. So yeah, that's where we got to, isn't it? I don't know if there was a genuine desire for disarmament. Instead of investigating Khrushchev's proposal, the Western powers put forward proposals of their own and thereby kept alive indefinitely the futile contest of argument and counter-argument. There is one other matter which is likely to be of very great importance within a decade. It is that of manned satellites in orbits around the Earth. And just as a side note, crow777radio.com, he thinks that satellites do not exist as they have been described. But again, I don't know. I haven't looked into it. I'm not sure. My mind is open and I'm just asking questions. Such satellites would pass periodically over enemy territory and might drop bombs from a very great height. If they stayed at a considerable distance above the Earth, they would be invulnerable. But the damage that they could do would be enormous. We must expect, if nothing is done to prevent such an appalling situation, that, before many years have passed, outer space will be full of these satellites raining death and destruction upon the countries beneath them. As yet, since this has not yet happened, it should be possible to prevent it. It should be possible to reach an agreement that the sending of missiles either into orbits around the Earth or into remoter regions should be under international control and should not be undertaken by any single nation or group of nations. The difficulty at present is that Russia appears to be more proficient than the United States in this matter, and that, therefore, Russia's confidence and the United States' bruised pride will be an obstacle to mutual understanding. We must hope that before long there will be equality between Russia and the United States in this matter. Russian present superiority is to be regretted, not because it is Russian, but because it is an obstacle to agreement. It would be equally regrettable if the superiority were that of the United States. It is not only Earth satellites that are to be expected before the end of the present century. We must expect that it will be possible to send men first to the Moon and then to Mars and Venus. To many, all this may still sound fantastic, but it is being seriously considered by American military authorities, and presumably also by those of the USSR. One eminent military authority, on being confronted with the likelihood of Russians being the first to reach the Moon, solemnly argued that this would not matter, since the United States would counter the Russian move by landing on Mars and Venus. And there's a footnote here. This is Lieutenant General Donald L. Putt, Deputy Chief of Staff, United States Air Force, giving evidence before a House Committee on Armed Services on February 25th, 1958. He said, quote, "We should not regard control of the Moon as the ultimate means of ensuring peace among Earth nations." End quote. This, he said, would be only a first step towards stations on planets far more distant from which control over the Moon might then be exercised. Continuing, I think it is important to bear in mind such possibilities of the near future. The world in which we are now living would have seemed, before 1945, too horrible to be endured. But in the course of 16 years, we have got used to it. Probably 16 years hence, if we exist still, we shall look back to the world of 1961 as a happy and easygoing paradise in comparison to what we shall then be enduring. And all for what? We must expect rival parties of Russian commissars and American Marines to travel at enormous expense to the surface of the Moon and to keep themselves alive there for a few days while they search for each other. When they find each other, they will exterminate each other. Each side will hear of the extermination of the other side and will proclaim a public holiday to celebrate the glorious victory. This is the kind of cosmically laughable tragedy towards which the statesmen of the world are leading us. Perhaps, just perhaps, as in imagination they soar above our atmosphere, some minute scrap of common sense or common humanity may find its way into their minds, and they may agree that our terrestrial quarrels should not be spread throughout the universe to display our folly and wickedness to whatever living beings happier planets may contain. That whole bit there just reminded me of, is it Moonraker, the James Bond film? Is that it, where they go to the Moon and there's all lasers and stuff, and there's a kind of Jeffrey Epstein type figure who's building a colony up there with a race of super babes or something. It's a long time since I watched it, but in one of the James Bond films, he runs through a set which is like a moon landing set. And the implication is, it's a film set, but it's like mocked up to be the surface of the Moon. And the implication is that was a place where they film scenes for movies or documentaries that are about the Moon. And I don't know if that's the same one, but that whole imagery there of people fighting and battling on the Moon just reminded me of the James Bond thing, which reminded me of that scene, that bit in one of the James Bond films where there's where there's a moon landing set. So interesting stuff. To conclude this somewhat gloomy chapter, yeah, it has been gloomy, We must become aware that the hatred, the expenditure of time and money and intellectual ability upon weapons of destruction, the fear of what we may do to each other, and the imminent daily and hourly risk of an end to all that man has achieved, we must be aware, I say, that all of this is a product of human folly. It is not a decree of fate. It is not something imposed by natural conditions. It is an evil springing from human minds, rooted in ancient cruelty and superstition, appropriate perhaps to savage hordes long ago, but in our age, destructive first of happiness and then, in all likelihood, of life. One thing only is needed to turn this hell into a heaven. It is that East and West alike should cease to hate and fear each other, and should become aware of the common happiness that they can enjoy if they are willing to work together. It is in our hearts that the evil lies, and it is from our hearts that it must be plucked out. Very nice, actually. I quite like all that speech there. We have way more in common with people in other countries, citizens in other countries, than we have differences. It's just the maniacs running the show at the top who want us to fight and kill each other and send our children into war zones and all that sort of stuff. But that is chapter 9. Got 2 more chapters left. What did you think of that? Very gloomy. Definitely. He was on the money there when he said it was a gloomy chapter, but yeah, some interesting points. I thought I'll nip over here and have a look in the chat, see what you guys are. Whoa, I'm not going to be able to read all this. Look at all these quotes. Not too many actually. Hasdak says, "You deserve more watching, mate." Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Hasdak. Couldn't agree more. No, I'm happy with this nice little small intimate group we've got, and I like that I'm getting to know your names and you're coming back. To me, I just have faith that it will get to the right people, and if the audience grows, it grows. If it doesn't matter, because to me, it's just about the people who need to hear me hearing me, and whether that's 1, 10, 20, 100, but it doesn't matter to me. But I appreciate the sentiment, I do. And if you know of anybody who you think would get some value out of these videos, then send it over to them and see if we can hook them in, get them into the community. You never know. I got a lot of books to get through, as you guys know. Frank Lennon. Well, if a goose missile comes in, all we need to do is duck. That's such a dad joke. I love it. Good stuff. Hasdak says, "Follow the science, safe and effective." Yes, safe and effective, always. Heidi, UN troops. Yeah, that sounds like what he's kind of teeing up. I'm surprised that last paragraph of this chapter didn't conclude with something like, what we need is for the West and the East to stop fighting each other and unite and recognize that they can come together under a world government. But he's kind of veered away from the topic of world government now. I was hoping for a little bit more of that, but he kind of just decided to lay more of the fear porn on us in this chapter, didn't he? Hasdak says, "I have to hide my tattoo." Well, hope you didn't get it on your forehead or somewhere super obvious. Should have been thinking ahead when you got it, man. I believe, so this is Hasdak says, "I believe Ukraine happened because certain weapons needed to be used by date was coming up. It costs a lot to get rid of them." I've heard that somewhere else. Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect, right? Weapons and weapons manufacturers, they got a business to run. They can't just make these things. It's like it's the planned obsolescence that's built into things. A good friend of mine told me about. I think it was a documentary called "The Light Bulb Conspiracy." And the first light bulbs they ever made would just last and just last forever, basically. And I saw a video on Instagram of a fridge from the 1960s, and that thing was so well designed. It was way better designed than any of the fridges I've seen, in any of the houses I've ever lived in. It was solid, really, really removable compartments and swiveling shelves, just so solid. It just looked like it would last forever. And I can't even buy a webcam that lasts a year. I can't even get a year out of my webcam. So the weapons have got to have a similar thing going on, and these manufacturers got to be like, hey, look, if we put a sell-by date on these things, then we've got to sell more of them, right? And there's always that sort of thing of like, well, I bought it, so I got to use it. And then, this is how you get that revolving door with all our politicians investing in weapons companies and then going onto the boards of weapons companies and then going back into politics and drumming up war so these weapon companies, the value of the shares and stocks can go up, and that's how they get rich. And if you take a look at like the net worth of the political class in America, especially, like they're just getting richer and richer and richer and richer. And it's all insider trading. It's all, they know that the policies they push through are going to benefit this certain industry or get rid of this competitor and prop up this competition. And they kind of plan it and manipulate it that way. And it's just so transparent that that's what's happening, that it amazes me that anybody still votes, you know. I had a friend who said voting, it's like choosing between the kitten punchers and the puppy kickers. And I think that sums it up really well. Frank Lennon says page 115 should be under international control. Yeah, you're right. I think, he did allude to that was the only kind of allusion to one world government here, wasn't it? It was like that little phrase, yeah. Hasdak says Devon Island is said to be the moon filming location. All right, I hadn't heard of that before. Heidi says Ivor Cummins did a video on obsolescence of his washing machine. My ex-mother-in-law is using the fridge she bought in 1962 in France. There you go. I mean, if we actually had a society and corporations and countries and whatnot ran by non-psychopaths, then we would just be able to buy something once and it would last us most of our life, failing some sort of catastrophic, event or damage to that thing. You should be able to buy one. There's no reason why you can't do that for most things. Just buy it once and then it's good and it lasts for a long time, So, but the problem is, I think nowadays in today's kind of market and the way it's sort of set up, that if you brought a product to the market that did that, you're not going to be able to keep expanding and growing, which is what shareholders demand, isn't it? And it's what corporations have to do these days, is continually grow and exponential growth and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So yes, I think that is a very good, astute observation about why wars continue and why countries like, for example, America have just been in constant war for the last 200 years in one form or another. And it's never addressed or talked about, is it? It's like, well, we got to make money for our shareholders. Lockheed Martin has a load of shareholders and they got to get their bonuses and dividends paid out. So I don't know, where should we invade now? It's that financial benefit aspect to war and warmongering really needs more scrutiny, I think, and more attention paid to it when we're getting these narratives through our televisions about Ukraine or Palestine or whatever it may be, wherever it may be. You got to look at, right, okay, well, who in our government is invested in the companies that are supplying those wars with weapons? Kind of thing you want to know. It's the kind of thing that proper journalists and proper journalism would cover and teach you, and it's kind of how you know that the mainstream, excuses for journalism and news are really not doing their jobs properly. All right, let's go back to the book cam, and we shall carry on with chapter 10. Thank you all again for being here. This is a good one. This is chapter 10. This is the penultimate chapter, and it is called Territorial Problems. So any comments or quotes or ideas, please pop them in the chat. We'll have a review at the end. There are a number of territorial questions which will have to be decided before peace can be considered secure. Formosa, Korea, and Laos are among the most obvious. It's not easy to think of any principle for deciding such questions which would be acceptable to both sides. The West is apt to maintain that it would accept the principle of self-determination, but on a closer scrutiny, it appears that the West is only willing to apply this principle to countries which are at present in the Soviet orbit. It is not ready to insist upon democratic self-determination in Spain or Portugal, and it is doubtful whether it would accept the principle in those parts of the Western Hemisphere where there might prove to be a pro-communist majority. It is quite impossible at present to foresee the outcome of negotiations designed to settle such questions. The only thing that can be said quite positively is that they should be settled by negotiation and not by mutual threats in the manner of brinkmanship, but by compromises in which neutrals should be invited to participate. The West has been to blame ever since the Russian Revolution for a Rip Van Winkle policy. For a long time, the West refused to acknowledge the Soviet government. America and UNO are still refusing to acknowledge the communist government of China. The West has not acknowledged the government of Eastern Germany or recognized the definitive character of the Oder-Neisse frontier. As regards this last, the West German government and the vast majority of individual Germans everywhere passionately resent it, but the difficulties of any revision in this respect are quite insuperable. In the first place, the communist bloc will never consent except as a result of defeat in war, but such defeat would only happen in an all-out nuclear war in which the West would be equally defeated and probably all ordered government would come to an end. All ordered government would come to an end. In the second place, the restoration of Germany's former frontiers would entail a repetition in reverse order of the appalling large-scale cruelties which were practiced by Russians and Poles when the German population was expelled from the regions that were no longer legally German. Recognition of an existing regime should not be regarded as implying approval. It should be regarded merely as an acknowledgement of existing facts. The West, in the end, came to admit this as regards the USSR, but it did not learn from this experience the unwisdom of tardiness in acknowledging regimes which cannot be upset without world war. Much the most difficult and dangerous territorial problem facing the world at the present time is that of Germany and Berlin. This question is, at present, in a state of such acute crisis that anything said about it may well be obsolete before it can be printed. Nevertheless, something must be said about how it should be treated and about how it should not be treated. It should not be treated by saber rattling on both sides, which, unfortunately, is being practiced. For example, in February 1961, Admiral Burke, the United States Chief of Naval Operations, said, quote, "I personally do not think there is going to be a general war as long as we retain our ability to destroy the Soviet Union, no matter what she does. We now have that ability," end quote. And he said that in the Times on February 17th, 1961. Mr. Khrushchev made a very similar speech on July the 9th, 1961, saying, "Any aggressor, should he raise his hand against the Soviet Union or its friends, shall receive worthy rebuff. The Soviet army have at their disposal the necessary quantity of thermonuclear weapons, the most perfect means of delivery, close and medium-range rockets and intercontinental rockets. May those who are thinking about war not think that they will be saved by distance. No, if the imperialists start a war, it will end with the complete defeat of imperialism. Mankind will once and for all put an end to a system which gives rise to predatory wars," end quote. And he also said that in the Times on July the 10th, 1961. I agree with Admiral Burke and Mr. Khrushchev that forces on their own sides will be capable of exterminating the enemy. But each of these eminent philanthropists has failed to notice that the enemy will also be able to exterminate his side. These mutual threats contribute nothing whatever towards a settlement and only serve to make war more probable. The immediate question at issue is West Berlin, and it must be clear to all parties that, in a war, practically all the inhabitants of West Berlin would perish. On the face of it, this is not a very effective way of protecting them. The question of West Berlin is exceedingly complex, and it may be well to review the rights and wrongs briefly. Itchy nose there. Owing to the policy of unconditional surrender, which was adopted against Germany in the Second World War, the war did not end with a peace treaty, but with an agreement among the victors as to how Germany should be governed. Germany was divided into 4 zones: American, British, French, and Russian, each to be administered by the power to whom the zone was assigned. Berlin, which was entirely surrounded by the Russian zone, was similarly divided into 4 sectors, in each of which the power concerned was to be omnipotent. But, by an almost incredible folly, the West made no provision for freedom to come and go, to or from its sectors over the Russian zone. The Russians took advantage of this omission when they imposed the blockade in 1948. When the airlift proved that the blockade was futile, the Russians consented to an agreement admitting freedom of ingress and egress to and from West Berlin. The three western zones of Germany had, meantime, been united and permitted to establish democratic self-government. The same thing had been done with the three western sectors of Berlin. All negotiations as regards Germany or Berlin depended for their legal validity upon the agreements reached at Yalta and Potsdam. These agreements were intended to be temporary until such time as a peace treaty with Germany could be concluded. The division of Germany between East and West has hitherto made such a treaty impossible. The Soviet government has now announced that it will conclude a treaty with East Germany, which will put an end to the wartime agreement between Russia and the West, and will, therefore, abolish the legal status of West Berlin unless this is acknowledged by a fresh treaty with East Germany by the West. The West considers that there is no reason to expect East Germany to be willing to conclude such a treaty, and the Soviet government has announced that it will not bring pressure to bear upon East Germany with the view to the conclusion of such a treaty. It must be understood that the question of substance in the whole issue of the right of free communications between West Berlin and West Germany, without which West Berlin would be completely at the mercy of East Germany. Since East Germany is completely subject to the Soviet government, this would mean that West Berlin could only survive by completely submitting to whatever terms the Soviet government might choose to exact. Legally, the position of the West is impregnable. The rights of the West in relation to West Berlin rest on an agreement between the United States, Britain, France, and the USSR, which cannot legally be abrogated unilaterally and which subsist until there is a general peace treaty, either with Germany as a whole or with each of its two parts. Khrushchev demands the conclusion of such a treaty, but announces that, if the West is obdurate, the USSR will itself conclude a treaty with East Germany and will consider that thereby the rights of the West in relation to West Berlin have been terminated. This view is legally indefensible. Morally, Khrushchev is infringing what both sides must accept as an absolute rule if nuclear war is to be avoided, since he is demanding by the threat of war a change in the status quo immensely advantageous to the East and immensely disadvantageous to the West. Granted that nuclear war is, for both sides, the worst disaster that could possibly happen, it follows that any change in the status quo must be by negotiation, not by the threat of force, and that it must not seriously alter the balance of power, since if it does, it will not be agreed to. It may be argued that, since nuclear war is the worst thing possible, if one side threatens it, the other side should give way. But rightly or wrongly, nations will not behave in such a manner. National pride combined with the belief that one's cause is righteous will inevitably lead to threats being met by counter-threats. It is this that makes the policy of brinkmanship so dangerous. At the moment, both sides are engaged in this policy, and in the question of Berlin, the chief blame of this appallingly dangerous situation lies with the USSR. The motives which have led to the Russian desire to make life painful for the inhabitants of West Berlin have not been openly stated, but are in fact fairly clear. East Germany and East Berlin are poor, and their governments are hated by a large majority of the population. West Germany and West Berlin are prosperous, and their governments are popular. A large number of the inhabitants of East Germany escaped to the West, which they could only do so long as West Berlin was accessible to them, and communications between West Berlin and West Germany were open. This situation was humiliating to the communist world. The only remedy from the communist point of view is to make West Berlin as poor and miserable as East Berlin, and to close the escape route from West Berlin to West Germany. This is not a purpose which any humane person can applaud. It cannot be said, however, that the West has dealt as wisely as it might with the Berlin crisis. If the status of West Berlin could be guaranteed, there would be no good reason against acknowledgement of the East German government by the West. The West ought to take steps to find out whether the East German government would be willing to preserve the status of West Berlin and the freedom of its communications with the outer world in return for the recognition of the East German government by the Western powers. So far as has appeared, hitherto the West does not know what are the intentions of the East German government in this respect. It is certainly not worthwhile to prolong the crisis and risk a general war if the status of West Berlin can be preserved. The West ought to be taking immediate steps to find out whether a treaty with East Germany, involving on our side recognition and on the other side a guarantee not to change the status of West Berlin, can be concluded. There has been talk of making the whole of Berlin into what is called a free city, but it has never been made clear whether this would entail free communication with the West. If it would, the proposal would deserve support. As regards free communication, it is important that West Berlin should retain its present airport at Tempelhof, and it is ominous that East Germany is demanding its abandonment. It was possession of the airport at Tempelhof that enabled West Berlin to survive the blockade. From the Western point of view, the difficulty of the situation arises from the impossibility of any local defense of West Berlin. The whole surrounding territory is open to Russian troops, and the only effective resistance possible to the West is an all-out nuclear war. In such a war, it is to be expected that all the inhabitants of Berlin, both East and West, would perish, a curious result of protection. Protection, in fact, so long as Russia is persistent, can consist only in the threat of nuclear war without its actually taking place. If the threat is thought to be only bluff, it affords no protection. If it is thought to be bluff but is not, the human race perishes. Yeah, so I'm kind of I'm not so well up on my East-West German Berlin divide history and knowledge, but he's kind of making the case that this dispute is ridiculous because any escalation into war is going to result in the wiping out of the entire human race, and therefore the whole thing is, why are people arguing about this? It's kind of a silly thing to be arguing about, going backwards and forwards, making these demands and trying to find just flexing, and it kind of reminds me of when you see people, drunk people, and they want to fight but they're being held back by their friends, no, I've got a better example. It reminds me of a video I saw of two dogs, and they're separated by a glass door, and they're on each side, and they're like, rah, and they're pulling at the glass door, and they're barking at each other, and they're being really aggressive. And then the camera pans back, and one of the dogs, like, you realize that it's a patio door and it's open, and one of the dogs walks in through the door past the dog has just been barking and shouting at to the water bowl, and takes a few sips of water, and then goes back out through the door to the other side of the glass again, and then they carry on barking and scratching at the glass and yelling at each other, right? So I feel like kind of that's what this is here, and Bertrand's role is to sort of point out the stupidity of that, and therefore kind of get credence as the sensible scientific man who's calling for peace and disarmament, and who is rational, and who we should listen to because he's a philosopher and he's good at maths, and he wants people to not kill each other, and so you can kind of I've heard Alan Watts say that Bertrand Russell was sort of the leader of a fake anti-war movement, because look, Bertrand Russell and his anti-war friends can't have been that successful, because look at all the war that's happened ever since then and is happening today, and now we're being threatened with conscription, and we're having our armies built and buffed up by people arriving here who they're just coming here from anywhere and on all places, and so I don't know how true that is. I don't know if Bertrand Russell was a knowing participant in this fake anti-war movement, or if he was kind of a useful idiot who was just like, okay, he's going to be the spokesperson for this thing, and put him out there and amplify his voice. With his connections, I kind of find it hard to believe that he was a useful idiot. I feel like he would have been, but compartmentalization is the way these things work. These plans get rolled out. Most people are unwitting to the big grand scheme and the grand plan. It's usually just a very few at the center of the spider's web who know that, and everyone else just gets sort of given a role and a responsibility and a script to read in many cases. So it could be that he's just been handed this script and told or he's been led down this path, with the preordained conclusion at the end of it, but he's been kind of led down this path by handlers and people in his life. I'm not sure. I'm theorizing right now and sort of spitballing, but that's what this chapter is kind of saying to me, is that The whole thing was obviously stupid, and if the nuclear war capability, the nuclear weapons capability did exist, just the fact that they would wipe everyone out means no one's ever going to launch it. No one in their right mind would ever launch it and press that button, because it's the end of everything, and everyone's got people they love and things they love. At the very least, they love themselves in the most cases. I can't imagine even the most suicidal and self-hating of people, those people, like Bertrand before he discovered mathematics. I can't imagine even he would have pressed the button on wiping the whole human race out, But maybe. Anyway, we'll get back to the book. Possibly, the West might undertake to submit the Berlin question to arbitration and rally the whole non-communist world against the threat of war by the powers which facetiously call themselves the peace-loving nations. So that's the tone of that is quite pro-communist, and he hasn't come out on the side of the communist East, but the way he frames it as communist and anti-communist and the peace-loving nations, and he's right here, aren't they really? Like, it is a bit facetious to call yourself the peace-loving nations when you're going out bombing people and starting wars and plundering countries of people who have a different color to your people. Mr. Dean Rusk has recently made a not wholly dissimilar suggestion, but it is doubtful whether either side would agree to such a proposal. It is not only Berlin, but the whole status of Germany, which makes the approach to a stable peace very difficult. Almost every German naturally desires the restoration of a united Germany. While part of Germany is communist and part non-communist, it's not easy to see how this can be achieved. It is to be noted that Khrushchev has lately revived the Rapaki plan, according to which the whole of Germany, and also some countries to the east of it, should be disarmed and neutralized and protected by a guarantee to which both Russia and the West should subscribe. From the point of view of world peace, this is a wholly admirable suggestion, and it is much to be wished that the Western powers would take it up. But I am afraid that there is little hope of their doing so. It is vehemently opposed by Adenauer, who wants a strong military Germany. It is also opposed by America, Britain, and France, who want German armed assistance in resisting Russia. Nobody in the West seems to have noticed that the Rapaki plan involves the disarmament of several communist powers, which would be an adequate counterpoise to the disarmament of Western Germany. The reliance on Western Germany by the Western powers has dangerous aspects which are carefully ignored. German troops are still commanded by generals, many of whom are ex-Nazis. Operation Paperclip, anybody? German revival under Hitler might well be a precedent. There are German troops stationed in Britain at the invitation of the British government. It is surprising that what we all felt in 1940 can be so quickly forgotten. All these tangled problems would become immeasurably easier to solve if the world were to adopt Khrushchev's proposal of general and complete disarmament, which, throughout the present crisis, he has frequently renewed. What makes the Rapaki plan unacceptable to Germans is the fact that under it, German and no other great power would be disarmed. If disarmament were general, this objection would lose its force. In the problem of Germany and Berlin, none of the great powers of East and West have, so far, emerged with credit or shown any degree of wise statesmanship. Perhaps, as the threat of nuclear war grows more imminent, both sides may withdraw from the brink and find some way by which their populations may be allowed to remain in existence. But it seems at least equally likely that nationalist pride and determination not to yield to threats will drive both sides on until both perish in mutual folly. That is the end of that chapter, and we only have one chapter left, so that was chapter 10. I don't have much more to add to my commentary of that other than what I interjected with just a moment ago. It's kind of strange, this book. It doesn't sort of kind of flow. I thought it would be a bit more focused and have more of a sort of build-up and a crescendo, and then we'll see what he says in the conclusion. But he's kind of hinted at world government more than really laid out, this is how we do it and how it's going to work. And he's just sort of, it's almost like he's drumming up all this fear and planting the seed in the mind of the person who gets fearful that world government and regulation is a solution. That's how it seems to me. But I'll go over to the chat, see what you think. Um, Heidi B, message retracted. I've done that loads of times in chats. Like, oh no, that was stupid. I'll get rid of that, or maybe not. Peter Estrada, quote from a smart young lady back in the 1930s: If voting made any difference, they would have made it illegal a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, like, you can work out the statistical, the impact of what your vote has statistically, and it's basically zero. And this is how you end up with the Coke versus Pepsi option. And it's because your single vote on its own is actually nothing. So all you can do is add it to what a group of people are doing, and then even in an outcome, it's only it's 51%. It's mob rule, and so the 51% get to dictate how the 49% live. In the best case scenario. So it's a sham, really. It's a bit of a con, and it's a bit of it's a sort of. The best example I heard was from Richard Grove, who said it's like a child in the backseat of a car with a little toy plastic steering wheel who thinks that they're driving the car. Looking out the window like, yeah, I'm driving. That's kind of what it's like, I think. The lesser of two evils is still evil. And if you don't want to vote for evil, you should be able to just say, I don't want to be in this game. I'm going to opt out. Can I opt out, please? No, you cannot opt out. And that's when you kind of like, is this what they're telling me it is, or is this something else? Hasdak says BlackRock and Vanguard. LJ Bates was having that conversation yesterday. Throwaway society. Yeah, everything is throwaway and temporary, and it breaks and it changes. And I think it's part of the reason is profiteering and greed. But another part of the reason is that just get people used to changing, and just get people so like nothing is stable. Nothing can be relied upon or depended upon. The reality is constant flux and change. And now this thing's gone. And, like my hometown and the towns that I grew up in are completely transformed in, I'm 37, and just in that, my half a lifetime, it's unrecognizable. And all the shops that I went to as a kid are gone pretty much. And my hometown, I've been told, it used to have cinemas and nightclubs and 40 pubs. And now it's just got nothing. It's got a handful of pubs and a few takeaways and a few barbershops and 2 supermarkets. No cinemas, no nightclubs. And it's just kind of that people are just so used to this change going on all the time that they accept it as normal and don't really question it. Oh, it's just progress. It's just change. It's just what happens. And I think our, like tech being constantly upgraded, it's like you need the iPhone. It's like up to 14 now or something, 15, and they just look the same. It's just each new version is just a more invasive, better, privacy destroying device. The upgrades are not benefiting the user in any way. The upgrades and the new versions are always benefiting the data harvesters, the collectors, the GCHQs, the NSA, the FBI, the 3-letter alphabet agencies, these snooping, spying tech companies that collude with the military-industrial complex and your governments in order to just gather every single tiny bit of like data you wouldn't even think of, like how quickly you look at something before you scroll, or how you walk and the speed you walk and where you go and these kind of things. All of it, data collection, data harvesting, spying and surveillance for that data to be sold and used against you, basically, and ultimately be fed into this kind of world government system of control, where you're going to have your score, and that's going to be fed into your digital money, and that's going to be controlled top down, probably by the UN, by the looks of things, and NATO. That's kind of the way it's going, isn't it? Excuse me. Let me go back to the conversation again. Let's have a look. Yep. Pertaining to suffrage. So Peter Estrada, you better believe they would press the button. If we can't have it, no one can. Yeah, perhaps. I don't know. No one ever did press it though, right? Despite all this, we could all die at any moment, and the geese might trip the sensor alarm, and it might happen. It never did, and they got used that one time and never again. I don't know. I'm not, but as I was reading, then I was thinking, do I? Some people are pretty violent and psychopathic, but I feel like those psychopaths are made by they're made that way, rather than that's the natural human nature that we are kind of created and designed with. But maybe they certainly would wipe out cities. That's what we've been learning since October the 7th. They'll flatten entire cities. And many times before that, it's just a recent example that we're kind of seeing. But would they irradiate the whole planet and turn it into a silent oven of death? I'm not sure they would. Anyway, let's continue. This is a long one tonight, but we've only got one short, brief little chapter for us to get through, and then we will wrap things up. So back over to Bookcam. And this is our final chapter, which is chapter 11, which is A Stable World. Let's see what he says. I'm writing at a dark moment, July 1961. And it is impossible to know whether the human race will last long enough for what I write to be published, or, if published, to be read. But as yet, hope is possible. And while hope is possible, despair is a coward's part. Oh, I quite like that line. I agree with him on that. But although I prefer instead of hope, I prefer optimism. And I haven't yet quite worked out what exactly is the difference between the two, but something about optimism just resonates with me, and hope. I guess it's because people use the term hopium. It's kind of been I don't know. To me, hope seems sort of inactive. Like, oh, just hope for the best. Carry on doing what I'm doing and hope for the best. Carry on smoking my cigarettes and just hope for the best. Whereas optimism, you kind of have to be taking action to have it, I feel like. But I don't know. That could just be my own sort of interpretation of those two words. But yeah, I'm a big fan of optimism. I think it's a good thing to have. But I agree with the sentiment here anyway. I think hope is possible, optimism is possible, and despair is a bit of a cowardly way to go about things. Even though it's very tempting, and it can be very alluring to be full of despair and to be negative and pessimistic and believe the worst is going to happen and it's all pointless, so why bother? But I don't think it's a good way to live your life. So a bit of optimism, a bit of hope. I agree with that, Bertie. But let's continue. The most important question before the world at the present time is this: is it possible to achieve anything that anyone desires by means of war? Well, if you own shares and stocks in a like BlackRock and Vanguard, their portfolio and their investments in Lockheed Martin and other such weapon manufacturers, there's quite a lot to that you would desire there, isn't it? Good returns on your investments. So yeah, I think he's kind of overlooking that, but they tend to, don't they? A lot of the times, a lot of these writers and influencers and public figures just tend to overlook the investments and the money-making side of the military, which is a huge industry, massive amounts of profits there. And they do say, if you want to get wealthy, then just buy stocks and shares in weapons companies, because they always go up. They're always doing business, if you are kind of unscrupulous in that sense. Kennedy and Khrushchev say yes. Sane men say no. On this supreme question, Kennedy and Khrushchev are at one. If one could suppose them both capable of a rational estimate of probabilities, we should have to believe that both agree that the time has come for man to become extinct. But, of course, this is not what they are both thinking. Pride, arrogance, fear of loss of face, and ideological intolerance have obscured their power of judgment. Their own blindness is reinforced by a similar blindness on the part of powerful pressure groups, and by a popular hysteria generated by their own propaganda and that of their colleagues and subordinates. What, in these circumstances, can be done to counteract the turbulent follies of powerful men? A pessimist might argue, why seek to preserve human species? Should we not rather rejoice in the prospect of an end to the immense load of suffering and hate and fear which has hitherto darkened the life of man? Should we not contemplate with rejoicing a new future for our planet? peaceful at last, sleeping quietly at last after coming to the end of the long nightmare of pain and horror. To any student of history contemplating the dreadful record of folly and cruelty and misery that has constituted most of human life hitherto, such questions must come in moments of imaginative sympathy. Perhaps our survey may tempt us to acquiesce in an end, however tragic and however final, to a species so incapable of joy. But the pessimist has only half of the truth, and to my mind, the less important half. Man has not only the correlative capacities for cruelty and suffering, but also potentialities of greatness and splendor, realized as yet very partially, but showing what life might be in a freer and happier world. If man will allow himself to grow to his full stature, what he may achieve is beyond our present capacity to imagine. Poverty, illness, and loneliness could become rare misfortunes. Reasonable expectation of happiness could dispel the night of fear in which too many now wander lost. And with the progress of evolution, what is now the shining genius of an eminent few might become a common possession of the many. All this is possible, indeed probable, in the thousands of centuries that lie before us, if we do not rashly and madly destroy ourselves before we have reached the maturity that should be our goal. No, let us not listen to the pessimist, for if we do, we are traitors to man's future. This is reminding me quite a bit of the climate warming, global change rhetoric, and that kind of message being put out there about, we can choose a better path, we can choose a better way. We don't have to choose the destruction of our species and drag all of the species on the planet down with us and bring it all. And, we can choose a better way by giving the government more money. Leaving these distant hopes, what must be done in our own age? First of all, we must get rid of war. At the present time, the nations engaged in the Cold War spend on preparations for slaughter £30,000 million a year, or £570,000 a minute. And these are crossed out here because, if you remember, those of you who have been here or at least seen the first video in this series, this book came with this little slip in here, this little flyleaf thing, which corrects the numbers on page 129, which we have just reached. And that is why, past me, and I forgot I'd done this, but I must have done it when I first got the book. I came in with a pencil and I corrected those numbers. So back in the day, in 1961, the nations engaged in the Cold War spend on preparations for slaughter £30,000 million a year. Is that right? 30,000? Is it 30,000 million? That's weird. For a mathematician, it's a weird thing to say, isn't it? But yeah, that's what he's written. £30,000 million a year, or £570,000 a minute. Woo! See, profit. This is what it's all about. This is why the war machine keeps turning. Didn't Black Sabbath sing a song about that? Consider what this expenditure might do to promote human welfare. More than half the population of the world is undernourished. Not because it need be, but because the richer nations prefer killing each other to keeping the poorer nations alive and helping them to achieve a higher standard of life. Nothing, while our present mentality persists, induces the richer nations to help the others except the hope of buying their support in the Cold War. Why should we not instead use our wealth to buy their support for secure peace? There is a fear, fostered by those who are interested in the armament industry, whether as employers or as workers, that disarmament might cause a disastrous economic dislocation. This fear is not shared by those who are best qualified to pronounce as to its validity. I will refer the reader to two very competent and careful discussions, one in The Nation's Business, which is the organ of the United States Chamber of Commerce, for October 1959, the other by Senator Hubert H. Humphrey, Chairman of the United States Senate Subcommittee on Disarmament, in Think, for January 1960. Both these entirely orthodox authorities are agreed that experience at the end of the Second World War showed the possibility of a smooth transition from a war economy to a peace economy, given certain obvious and entirely practicable precautions. I think, therefore, that we may dismiss the paradoxical theory that we can only keep alive by preparing to kill each other. Here it comes. If a world government is to work smoothly, certain economic conditions will have to be fulfilled. One of these, which is beginning to receive widespread recognition, is the raising of the standard of life in what are now underdeveloped countries to the level which prevails among the most prosperous populations of the West. Until a certain economic equality among the different parts of the world has been achieved, the poorer nations will envy the richer ones, and the richer ones will dread violent action on the part of those who are less prosperous. Now, this whole bit reminds me of one of my longer live streams, the Hayes Reviews Live series. In those, I just cover news articles, and I do a range of news articles and try and highlight resources and books for further study, reading, and learning for the audience. So it's a slightly different kind of show than these ones where I read books. But I talked about one, might have been the last one I did, which was the Green Queen Climatriarch, and that episode I talked about how countries such as China and India are developing and growing rapidly because they're enjoying the use of fossil fuels and using fossil fuels to build their wealth and their economic prosperity and their living standards and these kind of things. Meanwhile, in our part of the world, well, I say our part of the world, but England, Europe, North America, we're deindustrializing. We're going the opposite direction. And that is interesting to me, that the what were kind of developing countries back when he wrote this are actually now becoming more developed and developing more rapidly as we are going the opposite way. And so that sort of part of the prophecy is kind of being fulfilled at the present time, would you say? But this is not the most difficult economic measure that may be necessary. Various raw materials are essential to industry. Of these, at present, oil is one of the most important. Probably uranium, though no longer needed for purposes of war, will be essential for the industrial use of nuclear energy. There is no justice in the private ownership of such essential raw materials, and I think we must include in undesirable private ownership not only undesirable private ownership. That's letting his little commie sympathies slip there, isn't it? Not only that by individuals or companies, but also that by separate states. The raw materials without which industry is impossible should belong to the international authority and be granted to separate nations in accordance with the two principles of justice and aptitude for their use. Nations which are lacking in this aptitude should be helped to acquire it. In a stable world such as we are envisaging, there could be in many ways a great deal more freedom than there is at present. There would, however, be some new limitations on freedom, since it would be necessary to inculcate loyalty to the international government and to curb incitement to war by single nations or groups of nations. Subject to this limitation, there should be freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of travel. There should be a very radical change in education. The young should no longer be taught to overemphasize the merits of their own countries, to feel pride in those of their compatriots who had shown most skill in killing foreigners, or to adapt just like the only heroes from our countries are the ones that kill people. Like he mentioned this at the start as well. He says it's kind of weird that we celebrate the generals and the war heroes who just for killing foreigners, isn't it? But here he's kind of what is it? There's a fallacy where you leave something out, the neglected aspect, where the logical fallacy of the neglected aspect is where you just leave something out of your argument. And so he's saying here that we got to stop teaching children to feel pride, to overemphasize the merits of their countries, and to feel pride in those of their compatriots who had shown most skill in killing foreigners. Well, what if the foreigners were attacking, were trying to invade and attack you, and you were defending the women and the children and the elderly and the people who couldn't defend themselves? It's a way more nuanced thing, but it's a very it's a foreshadowing of what is being taught in schools today, which is a lot of white guilt, a lot of identity politics around the history of the world is basically that of the white person going out and exploiting and enslaving and murdering and genociding and stealing from the non-white people. That is actually being taught in schools today. And it's a big issue, and it's talked about a lot in the internet sphere of alternative news. So pretty interesting that this is also happening now today. You know, don't teach people to look at the merits of their country. Teach them to hate their country and claim that they're communist and they want communism. Sorry. History should be taught from an international point of view, with little emphasis on wars and much emphasis upon peaceful achievements, whether in knowledge or art or in exploration or adventure. The education authorities of a single country should not be permitted by the international government to stir up chauvinist feeling or to advocate armed rebellion against the international government. Apart from these limitations, there should be a much greater... Oh, so that's your freedom of speech for you right there. He literally just said we need freedom of speech, didn't he? He was like, we need freedom of speech, but we need to limit that speech. Apart from these limitations, there should be a much greater freedom in education than there is at present. Unpopular opinions, unless they were such as to cause a danger of war, should be tolerated in teachers. The whole emphasis in all teaching of history or social subjects should be on man and not on separate nations or groups of nations. Or God, by the sounds of it. Both individuals and groups have two opposite kinds of incentive. One is cooperation and the other is competition. Every advance of scientific technique increases the desirable sphere of cooperation and diminishes the desirable sphere of competition. I do not mean that competition should disappear altogether as an incentive, but I do mean that it should not take such forms as inflicting widespread injury, more particularly, of course, in the shape of war. It should be one of the aims of education to make young people aware of the possibilities of worldwide cooperation and to generate the habit of thinking about the interests of mankind as a whole. As a result of such teaching, there should be a general growth of friendly feeling and a diminution of the propaganda of hate, which has hitherto formed part of state education in most countries. There are those who feel that a world without war would be a dull world. It must be admitted that, in the world as it is now, many people lead very uninteresting and circumscribed lives, and some among them feel that at last they are able to do something of importance and find relief from boredom and monotony when, in the course of a war, they are transported to distant countries and have a chance to see ways of life other than that to which they were accustomed at home. I think that provision should be made for adventure, and even dangerous adventure in the lives of such of the young as desire it. Such adventure, which would normally be cooperative, would demand discipline, cooperation, and responsibility, and even obedience, without which the necessary toughening of fibre might be lacking and which now form the basis of many people's love of war. There should be opportunity to join scientific expeditions for the exploration of the Arctic and the Antarctic, the Himalayas and the Andes, and for those who crave something even more adventurous, there should be space travel, which is on the verge of becoming possible. With the weight of armaments removed, it would be possible to provide at the public expense all that the restless young could desire in ways not, as at present, causing misery and disaster, and a risk of the end of man. If the danger of war were removed, there would be a transition period, during which men's thoughts and emotions were still moulded by the turbulent past. During this transition period, the full benefit to the expected from the ending of war could not be realized. There would still be an excess of competitive feeling, and the older generation at least would not readily adapt their minds to the new world that would be in process of being created. While the work of reorientation was going on, there would be need of an effort, possibly involving some limitation of freedom, to bring about the necessary adaptation. I do not think, however, that this adaptation would prove impossible. Human nature is at least 9/10 nurture, and only the remaining 10th is genetic. The part which is due to nurture can be dealt with by education. Probably in time, even the part that is genetic will prove amenable to science. So he's foreshadowing gene therapy Gene maybe in the form of an injection of some kind, maybe? I wonder if that's part of getting people to be acquiescent to a world government. Could be, right? It was rolled out on the whole world. Let us suppose that the transition period has been successfully traversed, and ask ourselves what sort of a world might be hoped for as a result. How would art and literature and science fare in such a world? I think we may hope that liberation from the load of fear, private economic fear and public fear of war, would cause the human spirit to soar to hitherto undreamt of heights. Men, hitherto. He loves that word hitherto, doesn't he? There should be a drinking game. You'd take a shot every time he uses the word hitherto. It's one of those old word that word really dates this writing, because I don't think people use it quite so much anymore. Men hitherto have always been cramped in their hopes and aspirations and imagination by the limitations of what has been possible. They have sought relief from pain and sorrow in the hope of an afterlife in heaven. As the Negro spiritual says, I'm going to tell God all of my troubles when I go home. But there is no need to wait for heaven. There is no reason why life on earth should not be filled with happiness. There is no reason why imagination should have to take refuge in myth. In such a world as men could now make, if they chose, it could be freely creative within the framework of our terrestrial existence. In recent times, knowledge has grown so fast that its acquisition has been confined to a tiny minority of experts, few of whom have had the energy or the capacity to impregnate it with poetic feeling and cosmic insight. The Ptolemaic system of astronomy found its best poetic expression in Dante, and for this it had to wait some 1,500 years. We are suffering from undigested science. But in a world of more adventurous education, this undigested mass would be assimilated and our poetry and art could be enlarged to embrace new worlds to be depicted in new epics. The liberation of the human spirit may be expected to lead to new splendors, new beauties, and new sublimities impossible in the cramped and fierce world of the past. If our present troubles can be conquered, man can look forward to a future immeasurably longer than his past, inspired by a new breadth of vision, a continuing hope, perpetually fed by a continuing achievement. Man has made a beginning creditable for an infant, for, in a biological sense, man, the latest of species, is still an infant. No limit can be set to what he may achieve in the future. I see, in my mind's eye, a world of glory and joy, a world where minds expand, where hope remains undimmed, and what is noble is no longer condemned as treachery to this or that paltry aim. All of this can happen if we will let it happen. It rests with our generation to decide between this vision and an end decreed by folly. Dun, dun, dun. So he did go out and say in the end there that world government is what it was all about. He didn't hammer the point, though. He just said here, didn't he, if world government was to work smoothly. Interesting that he talked so much about educating young people. I think these ideas have definitely been rolled out and fine-tuned and accelerated since 1961. Safe to say. I think part of the problem with this worldview is that scientism really can't provide you, can't give you the moral behavior, the structure or framework for moral behavior. Because scientism is kind of this worldview of, well, we all evolved from space dust. It kind of means that things are arbitrary and relative. And in a relative and arbitrary universe, you can't really have like objective morality. And if you can't have objective morality, then there's no reason to ever do anything good or be nice to people or to follow any rules or to be honest or be dependable or to stick to any agreements or contracts or any of these kind of things. So it just leads to people doing whatever they want. And that is, I don't think, really what Bertrand Russell is looking for. So the last thing we'll just get on the menu here is on the menu. I said menu because it's a list of books. And, I always look at these things kind of like, ooh, do I want to buy any of these? But I meant to say the last thing we'll get on the record here, which is the recommended books. So I think these are going to be ones that he's quoted from throughout. But I also have the sort of feeling that it will be more, these would be good ones to look at. On Thermonuclear War by Herman Kahn, Princeton University. But we got what's this one? This is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting in Delhi. National Planning Association, Washington. Columbia University Press, Department of State, Washington. So the kind of all the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. Kind of big mainstream. Macmillan. Big mainstream publisher. What have we got? There's a few more pages here. A few more books here that he recommends. Institute for Strategic Studies, that one. C. Wright Mills, that name I know. I have a book on him, of his, down here about communists. But there's another famous book he wrote that's escaping my mind right now. Right, so further reading there, and maybe good ones to watch out for. I bet some of these you could probably get for dirt cheap online. I don't think these are the kind of books that the price would be artificially inflated to prevent people buying them or getting copies of them. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is Bertrand Russell's Has Man a Future? What do you think? I think I've made all the points that I wanted to make throughout the videos and as we've been going through the chapters. Part fear porn, part propaganda for world government, certainly a kind of stepping stone towards the UN, empowering the UN and bringing the nations of Europe all under one banner, getting rid of their nationalism, their national identities. Interesting that he talked about armies of mixed nationalities, as we're kind of seeing that unfold in real time, plus the education of young people to be thinking of themselves as global citizens, the leveling out of of the developed world and the developing world, as we see deindustrialization in one as the other rapidly accelerates its industrialization to catch up. So a lot of things foreshadowed in this book. And this is why it's important to cover these books, because we kind of then see what's going on in the present day, and we realize that this narrative of it all being organic and it's just happening now without, it's like, it seems to be happening according to the plan. And the suggestions of the H.G. Wells and the Bertrand Russell type authors. And don't know, is it maybe a plan that is being rolled out on purpose? What do you think? It's kind of the purpose of this channel, though, to look at these books and make our minds up, make our own minds up. So I'll have a quick look at the comments, see what you guys think. All right, so we've got Peter Estrada. Hope don't make your car payment. Dick Gregory. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I hope they'll just stop asking me for money. Hasdak, I never lived in a stable world. America, Britain is always having a war or helping start one. Yeah, that's really true. And it frustrates me about the climate change conversation, because they never address the not that I even believe in the model that the whole thing is built upon, which is the anthropogenic global warming model, which is highly questionable. But if you do buy into the model, then you got to look at all the contributions of the military and all these movements and production of weapons and massive, carriers. And that never gets talked about. And instead you've got George Monbiot walking around saying, farming, we need to get rid of farming. That's the problem. Like, all right, man. We need to get rid of farming and eat some industrial produced slop. Okay, George. Thanks for that help. Frank Lennon says the Cuban Missile Crisis was 1962 and his book was 1961. Yeah, so a year. And interesting that he's talking about going to the moon. So it had this real heavy scientism kind of leaning to it. not really outright saying that science will save us, but certainly saying we need to get rid of anything. We need to get rid of the old ways. And generally, when writers like this say that, they're referring to things like religion, which, there's a good argument for the problems religion causes. There's plenty of problems caused by religion and dogmatic application of religion. But to throw it all out is to like throw the baby out with the bathwater, and to go purely into the scientific, materialistic worldview where there is nothing but molecules and atoms and chemical reactions. Well, that's when you stop seeing humans as human beings, and you just see them as big bags of skin and bones and liquids. And then it's a lot easier to kill them when you don't see them as human. And the materialist scientific worldview doesn't account for things like the soul, for things like spirit, for transcendental categories of things that we rely on, such as number. That's the classic example. And so yeah, it's very. He's kind of like, get rid of all that stuff. Look at it; it causes all these wars, and instead, let's all commit ourselves to scientism, because that doesn't start wars. Well, it does, but if we have a one world government, that'll prevent the wars. So it's kind of an incoherent. It's not much of an argument, I didn't think, considering he's supposed to be like a master logician and philosopher. If you look him up, he's always like, Bertrand Russell was the most lauded philosopher of the time, and it's like he's not really putting together a sort of argument in any sort of like classical sense, really. This to me sort of feels like he's more just spitballing and throwing around some ideas. He's just cobbled together a few chapters on a few topics, and I don't know if that. I'm not an academic critiquer of arguments and books, but I mean, it kind of, it didn't have the structure of a formal argument, I don't think. But maybe that wasn't what he was aiming for, what he wasn't going for. Let's have a look. Climatriarch stream is fire, says Heidi. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That was episode 14. I think I did it about a week ago. All those long streams that I do, they have a different color background. They stand out when you look at my live. If you go on the live tab on the channel, you can see them. And they're all based around a theme. And so it might be censorship, or it might be the trans agenda, the trans issue. That's one I've done a couple of on, or transhumanism, and a couple on sustainable development and these kind of things. I'm glad you like that one, Heidi. Appreciate the feedback. Yeah, Frank Lennon. Boom, page 30. One world government. Exactly. There it was. He had to say it, didn't he? Hasdak. Today my grandson was told there's only one God, and that's Allah. I've told my daughter-in-law to get in out of our school. Good luck with getting him out of the school. I hope you can do that. I think, I can kind of take it as far as it's very clear and obvious to me that we're in a created realm, and that there is a creator. And I also think through the things that have happened in my life and my experience through prayer and trying to connect with the source of what is good and perfect and beautiful and righteous and just, which is what I kind of think of as God, the source of what is true. And when I try to live up to the truest and highest and best version of myself, and say sorry for the things I've done wrong and really mean it, and then try and correct those things, which is tough work, but it's really the only work that exists. When I've done that, I've become very, my life's got better in many, many different ways. I'll spare you the details, but that's kind of as far as I can take it. And then I can't really sign off on any sort of dogma or ritualistic kind of behaviors and go here and eat this and do that and bow here, and all that kind of stuff is sort of, I'm sure it's valuable and useful and has its place and has its utility. But I think the main thing we need to get more people to realize is that this place has been, we're inside a creation, we are created, and it is a designed thing that we're like living within. And that is like step one. I think we just need to get more people to realize that, because the argument that it's all chaos, random, the Big Bang stuff, it just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't when you look at it. And then that one kind of switch over alone to, oh, this is a created place where we live, and the creator has good things, because it's not constant 24-hour torture and pain and suffering and misery. There's sunrises, there's birdsong, there's nature, there's I've got this stunning backdrop on my PC of mountains and a lake and a forest going up the bank, and I look at it every day, and I just think that is not an accidental thing. Let me see if I might be able to show it to you. Oh no, I don't think I'll be able to show it. But there's not an accidental thing. You don't see an ugly cloud or an ugly tree. They're all unique. They're all beautiful, and there's this incredible dance of interdependence and codependence in nature. And yes, there's competition, and there's death, and there's eating, and there's decay and all that sort of stuff in nature as well. But like I was saying about human nature, for the most part, people are peaceful, and they're just getting on with their lives, and they're not going out to start fights and wars and do any murdering and killing and all that stuff, So that, for my 2 cents, is why people like Bertrand Russell, I can't get really into what they're saying so much, because it seems very, very materialistic and materialistic and scientific. It's not scientific though. That's not the word I'm looking for, but I think you get what I'm saying. So yeah, I think it's all about like trying to get away from the dogma, the really dogmatic, this is how it is, and it must be this way, and that is the only truth, because it's another divide and conquer tactic. But I know everyone's opinions are different on that. But I think the key thing is atheism is dumb and makes no sense. and atheism and scientism, materialism is what the kind of technocrats want you to believe, and the view they want you to have, because if they can convince you that humans don't have souls or spirit, then you will be much more tolerant of your fellow man being treated like cattle and enslaved in digital systems and punished and whatnot. So I think that's the really critical thing to take away there. I hope that rant made sense. Frank Lennon says, thanks, Nick. Well done. Really enjoyable overall read. You're very welcome, my friend. Thank you for being such a wonderful part of the Telegram group, sharing links and resources and research. It's really good. That's what it's all about, sharing and learning together, Hasdak says, Earth could be heaven, but evil is in control. Yeah, I mean, there's something to that idea. I wouldn't say evil is fully in control, because I don't experience much evil in my life. I think we still have free will, and there are still aspects of reality that we do have control over. Our thoughts, the things we say to other people, the things we say to ourselves, the things we choose to put in our bodies. There is control that we have, that we can exert, that we can have influence over. But overall, in general, there's definitely some sort of evil presence going on, like trying to co-opt people, I think, and get in their minds and get them to just be nasty to each other in their own image, kind of thing. Frank Lennon says, cramped world could be eugenics. Yeah, cramped world. I mean, there's loads of space. There's so much space and abundance and room for everybody to have more than enough, more than they could ever want and more than they could ever need. So a lot of the scarcity is manufactured, I think, in order to justify top-down controls, more bureaucracy, more data gathering and harvesting. And it's the classic top-down totalitarian tiptoe, I think. Peter Estrada says, politics, religion, football teams, MMA, etc. These are all distractions. Can't plot. If in, you gotta pray. Don't believe in fairy tales. Yeah, pretty good. And a lot of those that you just said are classic divide and conquer, right? You got to support this team or that team, this religion or that religion, this fighter or that fighter, red team, blue team, Pepsi, Coca-Cola. Pick a side. And they need you to pick a side because then they can control you better. And if you say, I don't want to pick a side, I'm not into that game, then they're like, oh, we got a live one over here. Cancel him, ban his channel, shadow ban him, quick now. Heidi says they want you to see yourself as a meat sack. Absolutely, yeah, I think that's what it is. They want you to just see yourself as a sort of pointless, worthless bag of blood and bones and guts. And so what? There's nothing more. There's nothing valuable there that needs preserving or honoring or taking care of or respecting. And that gets people to stop respecting themselves And once you lose self-respect, if you don't have respect for yourself, then you can't give it to others. Like I've said before, if you don't have it, you can't give it. So you got to have self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness, self-respect, and then you can give all those things to other people. So yeah. Richard Morris, thanks, Nick. Enjoy being part of the study group. I'm glad you're here. And everyone's saying thank you. Cool. Well, Hasdak, thanks, Mr. Hayes. I'm off to watch Owen Benjamin. Yes, go and enjoy Owen Benjamin. He's awesome. I like him a lot. He's very confrontational. He's very funny. Lots of very smart observations and insights. And the journey that man's been on, and he's stood tall and strong throughout it all. Super inspirational. So let's wrap it up there. Wicked. Really had a lovely time. We've finished that book. Next one, I think I mentioned on the last stream, but is this Slender Volume, Lusitania, Colin Simpson. That's going to be good. We'll get some learning on. I'm not sure when the next stream is going to be, so I won't tell you right now, but I'll plug it into the channel as a scheduled event. I'll announce it on Instagram and Telegram. Keep an eye out, probably one evening this week. Let's have a look what we got. It won't be Thursday, I can tell you that much. But we'll see. Hopefully I'll get back on tomorrow for you. So thank you all for being here. This is wonderful. We did it. We did another book. That's the third book we've done on this channel now. So the playlist for previous books, they're on the playlist tab. This video will go into the playlist for the Bertrand Russell book. And you can catch up and check out the other ones we've done. Lusitania next by Colin Simpson. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves and each other. And God bless.